moving on to number 3, how did life change during the Neolithic era? If you think about how advanced Neolithic people actually were, it's probably not that surprising that we see some really big changes happening in human interaction and human society. Think, for example, about the little piece that we looked at in class on the Iceman. You know, he had a backpack. He had copper tools. He had what may have been like a religious talisman and maybe a first aid kit. There was a lot of stuff there in terms of, you know, the sheath on his knife, things that, you know, archaeologists really didn't associate with Neolithic man that were found on that body, and that was less than 20 years ago. So our conceptions of these things are still changing. We don't know everything yet. But Neolithic people, remember, same brain power that you have. Essentially, people have not changed. We're talking about only, you know, about 10,000 years ago. So, not too surprising that the ball really starts rolling during this time period. For the first bullet, how did the agricultural revolution begin? There are a couple of different ideas here. One of them is that as the climate began to get a little bit warmer, we have a temperature change just, you know, kind of around the world in general. Temperatures rise, you have a longer growing season, and because of a longer growing season and some areas of land are becoming dried out, it becomes a lot more possible just in the environment for more food to be available. As more grain is available, you have more people living longer, you have a bigger population that starts to form, and for nomadic groups, suddenly they have more people to take care of, and they've got to come up with some alternative to just hunting and gathering. So farming would have maybe been one viable alternative. Another thought is that women were responsible for early farming because biologically, well, we'll get into that in a second. Women were maybe responsible because as people are disposing of, you know, the waste, the stuff that they're not eating, they're throwing away seeds, they're throwing away the pits from fruit, they're throwing away all this stuff that they're not consuming at various sites. They come back the next year or a couple seasons down the road, and they see that plants are coming up. And they would have been smart enough to make that association for cause and effect. Now, why women? It's not that you have a real strong division of labor in prehistoric society. That doesn't really seem to pan out with some of the evidence. Were men that much bigger and stronger than women? Not necessarily. Not if you look back at some of the evolutionary stages. So why do we throw this on women and say women may have been the first farmers? Biologically, women would have been the ones dealing with children, especially very young children. And if you are a prehistoric woman and you're burdened with a couple of kids, you're probably not going to be the one who takes off with a hunting party, you know, with 2 kids hanging off of you, you know, to go kill a woolly mammoth. That would have been rather difficult and probably not a very good idea. Does that mean that women never hunted? No, they probably did. But we do associate women with farming because genetically it seems like maybe that's more reasonable. All right, so how did it begin? May have been an accident. They may have figured out the cause and effect. It may have been that they needed some alternative for more food. How did the agricultural revolution spread? Well, what we do know is that this did not happen at the same rate all over the world. We know that agriculture came to some areas faster than others. Over a period of a few thousand years, you see this spring up in different parts of the world. So it's not like people woke up and said, gee, let's go be farmers. It's not like that. Okay, it's not like that. So how did it spread? You may have had some nomadic groups coming into contact with farming settlements and go, oh, hey, that's a good idea. But in terms of, you know, how it got around the world, it's a lot more gradual than that. How did the agricultural revolution, lead to specialization in society? We'll talk about that first. So you have people beginning to farm. They've been domesticating animals going back to earlier man. We have some evidence of domestication. We know that some nomadic groups domesticated animals. They could move herds with them as they traveled.
Dogs.
So we have domestication of animals, we have farming, we have people able to stay in one place. As they stay in one place, their food production increases. We see a big population boom. With more people and better food, more food, food surpluses, not everybody has to spend all of their time working on hunting and gathering or farming, which frees them up to do other things that would have become necessary in the community. Specialization means that people, instead of having to do a little bit of everything, can focus on maybe one or two jobs that they're really good at. So we start to see the beginnings of things like pottery and weaving. Okay? People who are better at making tools, people who are better at farming. The skills become more and more refined after they start having settlements. So that's how we get specialization. For the growth of institutions, as you have villages that are expanding in size, we're talking about maybe, several thousand people that start, accumulating in one place. You're going to have a need for some kind of order and structure to make all of this work, to kind of coordinate the activities in a community. How do governments come about? We talked about this the other day. A couple of theories. Now, the why for government is that they need organization. The how is a little bit different. How do governments come about? One theory, the most basic theory, is that governments kind of grow from the structure of a family. Remember, that's the evolutionary theory. It evolves from a family structure. So you have a family group, head of the family. You get a bunch of families together. One person is the head of group families, and it kind of gets bigger and bigger from there. Another idea is the idea of force theory, that you have somebody who comes in and by the strength of will and physical coercion uses intimidation and power to take over the group. Now, realistically speaking, it's probably a combination of evolutionary and force theory, at least in the beginning. Okay, you have a group of families. The person who is the best leader kind of takes over. All right, so that kind of works. As we get into bigger communities and more institutionalized government, however, we get into the idea of divine right theory. It's not even called that until we get way into European history. But the idea is that people are in control because it's the will of God. And we see a lot of early societies that have government and religion intertwined. We're going to see that in Sumer. We're going to see that in a lot of the river valley civilizations. So, how do we get from the agricultural revolution to institutions? More food, population explosion, specialization, leads to trade. We have more trade, we have more organization, development of government, and institutions become entrenched.